A powerful but desperate tycoon spends sleepless nights at his daughter's bedside as she lies in a coma, with medicine offering no answers. Everything changes when a poor boy, with more faith than resources, kneels in the hospital and prays for a stranger. From that invisible gesture, something surprising happened. Watch until the end if you have faith. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The soft beeping of machines was the only constant in William Calloway's life now. For 93 days, that rhythmic electronic pulse had been both torture and lifeline, a reminder that his daughter Grace was still fighting, still here, if only by the thinnest of threads. The pristine walls of Boston Memorial Hospital's pediatric intensive care unit had become more familiar to him than the corner office of Calloway Investments, the financial empire he'd spent 20 years building. Mr. Calloway. Nurse Ellen Patterson approached with the same gentle efficiency she'd shown during these endless night shifts. The neurologist left these updates. No significant changes, but she hesitated, her experienced eyes betraying the unspoken reality they both understood. The doctors had started using phrases like managing expectations and quality of life considerations. Will nodded mechanically, taking the folder without opening it. What was the point? He'd hired specialists from 3 continents, flown in experimental equipment not yet approved by the FDA, authorized treatments that cost more than most people's homes. None of it had awakened his little girl. "I still think we should try that clinic in Switzerland," he said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. "They're doing work with neural stimulation that—" "We've discussed this." "Sir?" Ellen interrupted with the gentle authority of someone who'd been guiding families through the worst moments of their lives for decades. "Dr. Harrison believes moving her in this condition would create more risk than potential benefit." Will turned to look at Grace, so small beneath the hospital blankets, her chestnut hair, the same shade as her mother's, spread across the pillow. The drunk driver who'd plowed through that red light had walked away with a broken arm. Grace hadn't walked away at all. "I can stay with her if you need a break," Ellen offered. "No," Will said firmly. "I'll be here when she wakes up." Not if, when. Despite the statistics and brain scans and gentle warnings, he clung to that single word like a man dangling from a cliff edge. Ellen patted his shoulder and moved on to check Grace's monitors. Outside the glass walls of the ICU room, hospital life continued. Doctors making rounds, nurses changing shifts, maintenance staff quietly keeping the enormous medical center functioning through another Boston winter night. Will hadn't noticed the boy before. Small, with a too large navy hoodie and worn sneakers, he was kneeling on the polished floor of the corridor, hands clasped, eyes closed. At first, Will thought he might be a patient's relative who'd stepped out for privacy, but something about the intensity of the child's posture drew his attention. Ellen followed his gaze. "That's Tyler," she said with unexpected warmth. "He helps out around the hospital sometimes, runs errands for the staff, keeps the younger kids company in pediatrics. His sister's usually with him." "What's he doing?" Will asked, though it was obvious. Ellen's expression softened. "Praying. He does that sometimes, especially for the long-term patients. The staff doesn't mind, he stays out of the way." Will watched the boy for a long moment. There was something raw and honest in the child's concentration that pierced through the cynical armor Will had constructed over decades in the cutthroat world of finance. He'd abandoned prayer after his mother's funeral 25 years ago, finding more reliability in market trends and risk assessments than in divine intervention. But now, watching this stranger's child pray for his daughter, "Where are his parents?" Will asked. Ellen hesitated. "It's not really my place to say, but Tyler and his sister Lily stay at the Hope Harbor shelter downtown. They come here after school most days. Mrs. Martinez at the front desk gives them dinner from the cafeteria." She adjusted Grace's IV line. "He's a good kid. Takes care of his sister like she's made of glass." Will found himself walking to the door before he'd consciously decided to move. Something pulled him toward this child, this strange figure of faith in the sterile medical environment where science and money had failed him repeatedly. The boy, Tyler, looked up as Will approached, quickly scrambling to his feet. "I'm sorry, sir." "Am I in the way?" "I can move." "No," Will said, his voice gentler than it had been in months. "You're not in the way. I just saw you praying." The words felt foreign in his mouth, as if he were speaking a language he'd forgotten. Tyler nodded, straightening his shoulders. "For your daughter. I hope that's okay." "You don't even know her," Will said. Not accusingly, but wonderingly. "I know she's sick. And I know she's been asleep for a long time," Tyler said with the direct simplicity of childhood. "Nurse Ellen tells me about the patients sometimes. She says Grace is your only family." Will felt the familiar pressure behind his eyes, but blinked it back. 7-year-old Grace was indeed his only family, since Rebecca had walked out 2 years ago. Unable to reconcile herself to the demands of Will's career and the expectations that came with being Mrs. William Calloway. "Would you like to meet her?" The invitation surprised Will as much as it seemed to surprise Tyler. The boy's eyes widened. "Can I?" "They usually don't let kids who aren't family into the ICU." Will looked at Ellen, who was watching them through the glass. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I think they'll make an exception," Will said, holding the door open. Tyler approached the bed cautiously, his expression solemn but unafraid. Many adults struggled to maintain composure around Grace's still form, with its network of tubes and monitors, but this child showed no discomfort. "Hi, Grace," Tyler said simply. "I'm Tyler. I've been asking God to help you wake up." Will stood on the opposite side of the bed, expecting to feel foolish for allowing this unconventional interaction. Instead, something in the atmosphere of the room seemed to shift, not dramatically, but perceptibly, like the subtle pressure change before weather turns. Ellen entered, beginning her hourly check of Grace's vital signs and neurological responses. The routine was painfully familiar to Will, the pen-light checking for pupil response, the gentle manipulation of limbs, the soft questions that never received answers. Except this time, there was an answer. It was slight, so slight that Will might have imagined it if Ellen's sudden stillness hadn't confirmed his observation. When the nurse had squeezed Grace's hand, asking for a response as she'd done countless times before, Grace's fingers had twitched, barely, but they had moved. "Did you see—" Will started, afraid to hope. Ellen was already pressing the call button. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mr. Calloway, but I'm going to ask Dr. Harrison to come in." Tyler stood quietly, watching with those solemn eyes. "She's listening," he said with absolute conviction. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Harrison arrived, followed by 2 neurological specialists. Tests were ordered, responses measured, data analyzed. Will stood back, Tyler forgotten in the surge of medical activity, until a soft voice asked, "Can I bring my sister tomorrow?" Will turned to find the boy still there, watching everything with quiet intensity. "Your sister?" Will asked distractedly, his eyes fixed on the medical team conferring in low voices by Grace's monitors. "Lily. She's really good at talking to people who are sad or sick. She made Mrs. Evanston smile yesterday, and she hadn't smiled in weeks." Before Will could answer, Dr. Harrison approached, his expression guarded but showing something Will hadn't seen in months, a spark of cautious optimism. "Mr. Calloway, we're seeing some encouraging signs. I don't want to overstate anything. Grace is still in a significantly compromised condition, but there's been a measurable increase in her neural activity in the last hour. It's still too early to make predictions, but—" Will gripped the doctor's arm. "But it's good? It's progress?" Dr. Harrison nodded. "Yes, it appears to be progress. We'll continue monitoring closely and run additional tests in the morning. This could be a positive turning point." As the medical team dispersed, leaving only Ellen to adjust Grace's monitors, Will turned back to thank Tyler, but the boy had slipped away. Through the glass, Will spotted him walking down the corridor, pulling his too large hoodie closer around him as a man in scrubs, likely heading home after a late shift, held the door open to the bitter February night. Will made a decision then, one that would alter the course of multiple lives. He couldn't explain it logically, and logic had been his religion for decades, but he knew with sudden clarity that this child had catalyzed something medicine couldn't. "Ellen," he said, "that shelter where Tyler stays, Hope Harbor, do you know who runs it?" Ellen looked up, curiosity crossing her tired features. "Sister Margaret, I believe. Catholic charity downtown. Why do you ask?" "I need to speak with her. Tomorrow morning." For the first time in 93 days, William Calloway left the hospital with something other than despair weighing on his shoulders. As the elevator doors closed, he heard it, faint but unmistakable, Grace's monitoring equipment registering another independent response. Tomorrow, he would find Tyler and his sister. Tonight, for the first time since the accident, he would allow himself to hope. Dawn broke over Boston, painting the snow-covered streets with pale golden light. Will stood outside Hope Harbor Shelter, a converted church in one of the city's older neighborhoods. The Gothic Revival building, with its weathered stone facade, had likely been beautiful once. Now it was merely functional, its stained glass windows covered with protective mesh, its steps worn from decades of desperate footfalls. Sister Margaret wasn't what Will had expected. No habit, no crucifix, just a practical woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and eyes that evaluated him with neither deference to his wealth nor judgment of his expensive overcoat. "Tyler and Lily Mason," she confirmed, inviting Will into a modest office warmed by an ancient radiator. "They've been with us for about 8 months now. Exceptional children in difficult circumstances. I'd like to help them," Will said, realizing he hadn't fully formulated what help meant. Their situation is complicated, Mr. Calloway," Sister Margaret interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "Their mother, Elaine, passed away from untreated cancer last year. No insurance, working 3 jobs, avoided seeking medical care until it was too late. Their father left years ago. There's an aunt in Michigan who couldn't take them, and the foster care system—" She shook her head. "We've been able to keep them together here while we search for a more permanent placement." Will absorbed this information, thinking of Grace's private room at Boston Memorial, the teams of specialists, the no-expense-spared approach he'd taken to her care. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. "Tyler was at the hospital last night," Will said. "He prayed for my daughter." Sister Margaret's expression softened. "That sounds like Tyler. He believes very strongly in the power of prayer. Says his mother taught him that love travels through words if they're spoken with enough heart." Will shifted in the hard wooden chair. Something happened after he was there. Grace showed her first signs of response since the accident. "I'm very glad to hear that," Sister Margaret said carefully, clearly trying to gauge where this conversation was heading. "I want to offer Tyler and Lily a place to stay," Will said, the words forming as he spoke them. "In my home. Not permanently," he added quickly, seeing Sister Margaret's expression change. "But while Grace recovers," she responded to Tyler, and he mentioned his sister might help too. "I have plenty of room, a housekeeper, security. They'd be safe, comfortable." Sister Margaret leaned back, studying him. "Mr. Calloway, I appreciate your gratitude, but children aren't therapeutic tools. They've already experienced significant trauma and instability." "I understand," Will said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "This isn't about using them. It's about—" He struggled to articulate what he barely understood himself. "Last night was the first time in 3 months that I felt something other than helplessness. Tyler has a gift, a perspective that made a difference when nothing else did. I'm not offering charity. I'm asking for help." Sister Margaret remained silent, considering. "I've had background checks run on my staff. I can provide references from the hospital board. You can inspect my home," Will continued, unused to having to convince people of his trustworthiness. In the financial world, his word and reputation were unquestioned. "The children would have their own rooms, continue their current schools. My driver could transport them. And when your daughter recovers fully, or if she doesn't improve further," Sister Margaret asked bluntly, "what happens to Tyler and Lily then?" The question hit Will like a physical blow. He hadn't considered an endpoint, hadn't thought beyond the desperate need to recreate whatever miracle had occurred in Grace's hospital room. "They would always have a place," he said finally. "Whether Grace recovers or not, I give you my word." Sister Margaret studied him for what felt like an eternity before speaking. "I need to discuss this with Tyler and Lily. Ultimately, this is their decision, not mine. They're children, yes, but they've had to become very good at assessing what's safe and what isn't." She stood, indicating the conversation was concluding. "Come back this afternoon, 3 o'clock. We'll all talk then." Will left the shelter feeling both hopeful and unsettled. He'd made the offer impulsively, something entirely out of character, for a man whose financial empire was built on calculated risk and meticulous analysis. Yet it felt right in a way few decisions had since Grace's accident. His phone buzzed with notifications as he slid into his car, emails from the office, messages from his executive team about quarterly projections, a text from his assistant about a potential acquisition that needed his attention. For the first time in his career, none of it seemed important. Boston Memorial, he instructed his driver, setting aside the notifications without reading them. The hospital corridors felt different today, less like a prison and more like a pathway. Dr. Harrison met him outside Grace's room, clipboard in hand, his typically reserved expression replaced by cautious optimism. She had a restful night, Mr. Calloway. More importantly, the EEG shows sustained increases in brain activity. She's still not conscious in the conventional sense, but there's definitely something happening. The doctor hesitated. I understand there was a young visitor last night. Will nodded, unsurprised that the hospital grapevine had already spread the news. The son of a former patient, he lied smoothly, unwilling to explain the truth even to Grace's doctor. He asked to pray for her. Dr. Harrison nodded, neither endorsing nor dismissing the implication. Well, whatever the catalyst, we're seeing positive changes. I've scheduled additional tests for this afternoon, and Dr. Levinson from neurology wants to reassess her cognitive response patterns. Inside Grace's room, Ellen was adjusting monitoring equipment, her movements efficient but gentler than usual. Grace herself looked unchanged to Will's eyes, still pale, still motionless, but knowing that something had shifted beneath that stillness made all the difference. Has she shown any more responses? Will asked. Ellen smiled, an actual genuine smile that transformed her usually professional demeanor. She squeezed my hand during morning assessments. Deliberately, Mr. Calloway, and her eye movement has increased. She lowered her voice, though they were alone in the room. I've been doing this job for 27 years. I don't believe in false hope, but I do believe in unexplained improvements. Whatever happened last night, it woke something up in your daughter. Will sat in his usual chair, taking Grace's small hand in his. Hey, Princess, he said softly, using the nickname that had once made her giggle and roll her eyes in mock protest. I hear you're starting to wake up. That's my brave girl, his voice caught. I've got a surprise for you later. Some new friends I think you'll like. He could have sworn her fingers twitched at the word friends. The morning passed in a blur of medical personnel and tests. Will stepped out briefly to handle urgent business calls, delegating most matters to his executive team. Charles Blackwood, his late partner's brother and now a significant shareholder, was particularly persistent, demanding updates on the Westover acquisition and expressing concern about Will's extended absence from the office. Family emergency, Will responded curtly, knowing the explanation would irritate Charles, who had never approved of Will's promotion to senior partner after Robert's passing. The team has my full confidence. By 2:30, Will was back in his car heading toward Hope Harbor. His stomach knotted with an unfamiliar anxiety. When was the last time he'd cared this much about anyone's decision other than Grace's? Even with Rebecca toward the end, he'd been resigned rather than invested in the outcome of their arguments. Sister Margaret met him in the shelter's community room, a large space filled with mismatched furniture and scattered board games. Tyler and Lily sat on a worn sofa, the boy's arm protectively around his sister's shoulders. Lily was smaller than Will had imagined, wispy blonde hair framing a delicate face, her eyes enormous and serious in a way no 6-year-old should be. Mr. Calloway, Sister Margaret began formally, this is Tyler and Lily Mason. Children, this is Mr. William Calloway, Grace's father. Tyler nodded solemnly. How is she today? The direct question, bypassing small talk, made Will smile despite his nervousness. Better. The doctors say her brain is more active. She squeezed the nurse's hand this morning. Tyler nodded as if this were exactly what he'd expected. Lily looked up at her brother, then at Will with a searching gaze that seemed to cut through pretense. Sister Margaret says you want us to come live with you, Tyler said. Will sat across from them, deliberately choosing a low stool rather than the armchair that would have placed him above their eye level. I do. I have a big house with empty rooms, and I think Grace would benefit from your company. Both of you, he added, looking at Lily, who hadn't yet spoken. For how long? Tyler asked, practical even at 10. As long as you want, Will answered honestly. You could keep going to your school. You'd each have your own room. Mrs. Parker, my housekeeper, makes really good cookies. He felt oddly like he was interviewing for a position rather than offering charity, and strangely he preferred it that way. Lily finally spoke, her voice so soft Will had to lean forward to hear. Can we come back here if we don't like it? The question struck Will's heart with unexpected force. Of course they would want an escape route, these children who had already lost so much. Yes, he said firmly. Absolutely. If you're ever uncomfortable or unhappy, you can come back here, I promise. Sister Margaret nodded almost imperceptibly, apparently approving of his answer. Can we visit the hospital? Tyler asked. To see Grace? Every day if you want to, Will confirmed. Tyler and Lily exchanged a long look, communicating in that silent language siblings sometimes develop. Finally, Tyler turned back to Will. We'll come, he said with the gravity of someone much older. But Lily gets scared of new places sometimes, so we might need to bring her special blanket and books. Of course, Will said, unexpectedly moved by the boy's protective concern for his sister's comfort rather than his own. We can get your things now if you'd like to visit Grace this evening. And so it was decided, with a simplicity that belied the complexity of what they were undertaking. Sister Margaret helped the children gather their modest belongings. Everything they owned fit into 2 small backpacks and a tattered duffel bag. Will signed temporary guardianship papers that his lawyer would formalize later, and by 4 o'clock, Tyler and Lily were seated in the back of his Mercedes, wide-eyed at the leather seats and privacy divider. As they pulled away from Hope Harbor, Will's phone rang with Charles Blackwood's distinctive tone. He silenced it without answering, looking instead at the rearview mirror where he could see Tyler pointing out Boston landmarks to his sister. For the first time in months, Will felt something like peace settle over him. Whether it was hope for Grace's recovery or something else entirely, he couldn't say. But as they turned toward Boston Memorial, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the children's faces with golden light. Boston Memorial's pediatric wing buzzed with the usual evening activity, nurses changing shifts, doctors making final rounds, parents arriving after work to spend precious hours with their hospitalized children. Will guided Tyler and Lily through familiar corridors, noting how Lily clung to her brother's hand while Tyler walked with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Outside Grace's room, Dr. Harrison intercepted them, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of the children. Mr. Calloway, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing visitors this evening, he said, glancing at Tyler and Lily. This is Tyler Mason and his sister Lily, Will explained. Placing a gentle hand on Tyler's shoulder, they're family friends. The description felt inadequate for what these children had already become to him, but it would suffice for now. I've cleared their visit with Nurse Patterson. Dr. Harrison nodded, professional enough not to question further. Well, I have good news. The latest EEG shows continued improvement in Grace's cortical activity. We're seeing response patterns consistent with increased awareness of external stimuli. Will felt a surge of hope. Meaning? Meaning she's processing more of what's happening around her. Sounds, touch, possibly even voices. She's not conscious yet, but she's moving in that direction. Tyler looked up at the doctor with clear, direct eyes. She's going to wake up, he said with simple certainty. Not a question, not a hope. A statement of fact. Dr. Harrison's expression softened as he regarded the boy. You must be the young man who visited last night. Tyler nodded solemnly. Well, your presence seemed to have a positive effect, the doctor acknowledged diplomatically. Familiar voices and gentle stimulation can be very beneficial in cases like Grace's. He turned back to Will. Just keep the visit calm and brief, please. 15 minutes maximum. Inside the room, Ellen was adjusting Grace's position, gently turning her to prevent pressure sores, one of the countless medical concerns that had become part of Will's daily vocabulary. She smiled warmly at Tyler and introduced herself to Lily, who partially hid behind her brother. Grace had a good day, Ellen told them, her voice carrying the particular gentleness hospital staff reserve for children. She might be able to hear you, so you can talk to her if you'd like. Tyler approached the bed without hesitation, as comfortable as he'd been the previous night. Lily followed more cautiously, her eyes wide as she took in the medical equipment surrounding the still figure on the bed. Hi, Grace, Tyler said quietly. "I brought my sister Lily to meet you. We're going to stay at your house for a while, so I thought you should know who we are." Will watched, heart in his throat, as Lily stepped closer to the bed. The little girl studied Grace's face intently before turning to Ellen. Why doesn't she open her eyes if she's awake inside? The disarmingly direct question brought a smile to Ellen's face. "Her brain is healing," she explained. "Sometimes when people get hurt, they need to stay very quiet and still while they get better." Lily considered this, then turned back to Grace. "My mum was quiet at the end too," she said softly, "but she could still hear me sing to her." She glanced questioningly at Will. "Can I sing to Grace?" Will nodded, unexpectedly moved by the offer. "She'd like that, I think." Lily moved closer to the bed and began to sing in a sweet, clear voice. The song was a simple lullaby, one that mothers have sung to children for generations. The purity of it filled the sterile hospital room, transforming the space from medical to profoundly human. Will wasn't prepared for what happened next. As Lily's voice filled the room, the monitors tracking Grace's neural activity showed a visible increase. More remarkably, Grace's eyelids fluttered, not fully opening but clearly responding to the sound. Ellen moved quickly to the bedside, professional training overtaking amazement. "Grace, can you hear us, sweetheart?" She pressed the call button for Dr. Harrison. Lily continued singing, seemingly unaware of the medical significance of what was happening. Tyler stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on Grace's blanket-covered foot, his expression serene. What followed was another whirlwind of medical activity. Dr. Harrison arriving with 2 residents, neurological checks, rapid medical discussions in terminology Will only partially understood. Through it all, Tyler and Lily remained calm, stepping back when asked, but otherwise standing their ground with remarkable composure for children their age. When the excitement subsided, Dr. Harrison pulled Will aside, his expression a mixture of professional caution and personal excitement. "I don't want to overstate what we're seeing, Mr. Calloway, but Grace is showing unprecedented responsiveness. Her Glasgow Coma scale score has improved by 3 points just this evening." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Will asked, his gaze returning to the bed where Grace lay, still motionless but somehow different, more present. "It means we're seeing meaningful neurological recovery. If this pattern continues, we could be looking at consciousness returning within days, rather than the weeks or months we'd projected." The doctor hesitated. "I can't explain the sudden acceleration in her recovery. Medically speaking, it's unusual to say the least." Will looked over at Tyler and Lily, who were now sitting in chairs beside Grace's bed, Lily still humming softly. "Sometimes the best things can't be explained, Doctor." After the medical team departed, Ellen helped settle Grace into a more comfortable position for the night. "Those children are remarkable," she said quietly to Will. "In all my years here, I've rarely seen patients respond so dramatically to visitors." Will watched as Tyler leaned forward to whisper something to Grace, a prayer, perhaps, or simply words of encouragement. "They've been through their own trauma," he said. "Maybe that creates a connection we can't see." Ellen nodded. "Trauma, yes, but also resilience. They have that rare quality some children develop when life forces them to grow up too quickly. A kind of wisdom beyond their years." She checked her watch. "It's getting late. Dr. Harrison wanted their visit kept brief." Will nodded, reluctant to end this remarkable interaction, but understanding the medical necessity. "Tyler, Lily," he called softly. "We should let Grace rest now. We can come back tomorrow." As they prepared to leave, something extraordinary happened. Grace's hand, the one nearest to Lily, moved slightly, her fingers extending toward the little girl. Lily, with the instinctive response of a child, reached out and took Grace's hand in hers. "She wants to say good night," Lily said simply. Ellen quickly checked the monitors, then nodded to Will with wide eyes. This wasn't a reflex or coincidence. It was intentional movement. "Good night, Grace," Tyler said. "We'll be back tomorrow." In the car heading toward Beacon Hill, Tyler and Lily were quieter than they had been on the journey to the hospital. Will wondered if the reality of what they had agreed to was setting in, leaving the familiar shelter for a stranger's home, no matter how luxurious. "Are you two okay?" he asked, turning to look at them in the back seat. Tyler nodded. "Just thinking about Grace. She's really trying to come back." The simple observation struck Will with its accuracy. That's exactly what it had looked like. Not a passive recovery, but an active effort, as if Grace were swimming up from the depths toward the light and sound of these children. She liked Lily's singing, Tyler continued. I could tell. Will smiled. I think you're right. The doctors said her brain was more active when Lily sang. Lily, who had been gazing out the window at the passing city lights, turned to Will. Is your house very big? She asked, changing the subject with the quick pivots typical of children. It's pretty big, Will acknowledged. Too big, really, for just Grace and me. That's why there's plenty of room for you both. Do you have a dog? Lily's questions continued, gaining momentum as her initial shyness receded. We can't have pets at Hope Harbor. Sister Margaret is allergic. No dog, Will admitted. Grace wanted one, but I was always too busy. He trailed off, the familiar weight of regret settling on him. How many of Grace's simple requests had he deferred or denied because of work commitments? A dog, piano lessons, weekend camping trips, all sacrificed to the demanding god of his financial empire. Maybe you could get one now, Tyler suggested pragmatically. Dogs help people feel better. There was a lady who brought therapy dogs to the shelter sometimes. Even the really sad kids would smile. The suggestion lodged in Will's mind as they turned onto the tree-lined street in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood. His home, a 4-story brownstone that had once belonged to a shipping magnate, stood elegant and imposing among similarly grand residences. Lights glowed warmly from within. Mrs. Parker would have prepared for their arrival. He saw the house anew through the children's eyes as the car pulled up to the curb. The ornate iron fence, the meticulously maintained facade, the sheer size of the place, all markers of wealth and privilege that he had long since stopped noticing. This is where you live? Lily's voice was hushed, almost reverent. This is where we live, Will corrected gently. At least for now. Mrs. Parker met them at the door, her usually stern countenance softened by curiosity about their young guests. A widow in her 60s, she had managed Will's household with brisk efficiency for over a decade, stepping in to help with Grace when Rebecca left. Welcome, she said with a warmth Will rarely heard from her. I've prepared rooms on the 3rd floor near Grace's room. Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. She addressed Tyler and Lily directly, neither talking down to them nor treating them with the awkward deference some adults show to children from different social circumstances. Will led them on a brief tour of the main floor, the formal living room rarely used except for business entertaining, the library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the modern kitchen where Mrs. Parker reigned supreme. Tyler remained observant but reserved, while Lily's eyes grew wider with each new space. Where does Grace play? Lily asked, noting the distinct lack of toys or children's items in the immaculate rooms. The question caught Will off guard. She has a playroom upstairs, he said after a moment's hesitation. In truth, the playroom had gradually transformed over the past year into more of a study space, with Grace's art supplies and dolls giving way to educational software and books, as Will had pushed her toward academic excellence. Another, regret to add to the growing pile of the 3rd, floor revealed more of Grace's presence, photos on the walls, her bedroom door decorated with her name in colorful wooden letters, a collection of stuffed animals visible on her neatly made bed. Will had insisted that her room remain exactly as she'd left it, that fateful morning 3 months ago, down to the pajamas draped over a chair and the book still open on her nightstand. Mrs. Parker had prepared rooms on either side of Grace's, a practical arrangement that would allow the children to feel close to each other while still having their own space. Lily's room was painted a soft yellow, with a canopy bed that had once been in a guest room. Someone, probably Mrs. Parker, had placed a vase of daisies on the dresser and found a collection of children's books for the bedside table. Tyler's room across the hall was done in blues and greens, with a desk by the window overlooking the small garden below. His expression as he surveyed the space was difficult to read, appreciation mingled with something like wariness. Is it okay? Will asked, suddenly anxious that these accommodations, luxurious by most standards, might somehow miss the mark. Tyler nodded. It's really nice. Thank you. He set his worn backpack down carefully on the desk chair. Our mom would be happy we're somewhere safe. The simple statement hit Will with unexpected force. Safety. something he had taken for granted until Grace's accident, and something these children had likely never been able to count on. "You are safe here," he promised, meaning it more deeply than he'd anticipated. "Both of you." Dinner was a quiet affair, the children clearly tired from the emotional day. Mrs. Parker had prepared comfort food, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and made a point of asking what foods they liked for future meals. Will watched somewhat amazed, as Tyler gently reminded Lily to use her napkin and thank Mrs. Parker for dessert, an apple crumble that brought the first real smile to Lily's face since they'd left the hospital. As Will helped them settle in for the night, providing new toothbrushes and showing them where towels were kept, he was struck by the strange new rhythm his life had suddenly taken on. For 3 months, he had existed in a limbo of hospital corridors and desperate medical consultations. Now, in the space of 24 hours, he had become responsible for 2 children he barely knew, driven by an inexplicable certainty that they were somehow key to his daughter's recovery. "Mr. Calloway?" Tyler's voice came from the doorway of his room, where he stood in borrowed pajamas that were slightly too large. "Thank you for letting us stay here." "You're welcome, Tyler, and please call me Will." The boy nodded solemnly. "Will, do you think we could bring some of Grace's favorite things to the hospital tomorrow? Sometimes familiar objects help people find their way back." Will stared at the child, once again struck by the old soul wisdom in his young eyes. "That's a great idea. We'll pick some things in the morning." After checking that both children were settled, Will retreated to his study on the first floor, pouring himself a small scotch and sinking into the leather chair behind his desk. His phone showed 17 missed calls, most from the office, 3 from Charles Blackwood, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize. He should return at least some of them. The Westover acquisition wouldn't finalize itself. The Hong Kong investors wouldn't wait forever. 3 months ago, these matters had been the center of his universe. Instead, he opened his laptop and began researching therapy dogs. Morning light filtered through the ornate windows of Will's brownstone, casting geometric patterns across the breakfast table where Tyler and Lily sat eating pancakes Mrs. Parker had prepared. The night had passed without incident, no nightmares, no tearful calls for assistance, though Will had found himself checking on the children twice, an old parental instinct reawakening. "These are really good," Tyler said, carefully cutting another piece of pancake for Lily, who was drowning hers in maple syrup. "Our mom used to make pancakes on Sundays when she wasn't working." Will noted how often their mother appeared in conversation, always with fondness, never with the bitterness one might expect from children who had lost her to a preventable illness. Their resilience humbled him. "Mrs. Parker makes the best pancakes in Boston," Will said, sipping his coffee. "And wait until you try her French toast. It's Grace's favorite." The mention of his daughter brought focus back to the day ahead. "I thought we'd go to the hospital around 10. Before that, we can look through Grace's room for some things to bring her, like Tyler suggested." After breakfast, they gathered in Grace's bedroom. Will hung back, allowing the children to explore the space with natural curiosity. Lily gravitated toward the stuffed animals, examining each with careful hands. Tyler moved more methodically, studying the photos on the wall, the books on the shelves, building a picture of the girl they were trying to help. "She likes horses," Tyler observed, noting the equestrian trophies and model horses displayed on a shelf. Will nodded. "She rode every Saturday at a stable outside the city. And she plays piano," Lily added, pointing to a framed certificate from a recital. "She was just starting. Had lessons for about 6 months before—" Will trailed off, the familiar tightness returning to his chest. Tyler picked up a small music box from Grace's dresser, turning the key to release a tinkling melody. "We should bring this. And maybe her favorite stuffed animal?" He looked at Will questioningly. "The rabbit," Will said without hesitation. "The one with the blue bow. She's had it since she was 2. Lily found the rabbit in question, a well-loved toy with one ear slightly flattened from years of being clutched during sleep. She held it carefully, straightening its bow with gentle fingers. They selected a few other items, a photo of Grace with Will at her 7th birthday party, a small lavender sachet she'd made in a crafting class, a bracelet with her name spelled out in colorful beads. As they prepared to leave, Will's phone rang. Charles Blackwood again. With a sigh, he answered, stepping into the hallway. "Charles, what can't wait until Monday?" "The board is concerned, Will." Charles's voice carried the particular blend of false concern and genuine pleasure at others' difficulties that had made him unpopular among the firm's employees. 3 months of absentee leadership is stretching everyone's patience, especially with the Westover situation hanging in the balance. "Grace is showing improvement," Will said tightly. "I'm handling what needs to be handled. We've all been very understanding about your personal situation," Charles continued, as if Will hadn't spoken. "But there's talk of calling an emergency board meeting to discuss interim leadership arrangements." The threat was clear. As managing partner, Will held significant power, but the board could temporarily reassign his duties if they deemed him incapacitated or negligent. Charles, as the second-largest shareholder after Will, stood to benefit most from such a move. "I'll be in the office Monday morning," Will conceded, though the promise felt like betrayal of Grace's ongoing needs. "The Westover papers need my signature anyway." "Excellent." Charles couldn't quite hide his disappointment at having his power play thwarted. "Oh, and Will? I heard a rumor you've taken in some shelter children. The board might have concerns about your decision-making if that's true." Will felt cold anger rise in his chest. "My personal life isn't board business, Charles. I'll see you Monday." He ended the call abruptly, turning to find Tyler standing in the doorway, his expression making it clear he'd heard at least part of the conversation. "Are we causing problems for you?" the boy asked directly. Will was learning that directness was Tyler's way, no sugarcoating, no evasion, just honest questions, regardless of how uncomfortable they might be. "No," Will said firmly. "Some people just don't understand that there are more important things than business." Tyler studied him for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. "We're ready to go when you are." At Boston Memorial, the atmosphere in Grace's room had changed subtly from the previous day. The shades were partially opened, allowing more natural light. A nurse Will didn't recognize was adjusting Grace's position with brisk, competent movements. "Good morning," she said, glancing curiously at Tyler and Lily. "Dr. Harrison left instructions to prepare Grace for increased stimulation today. Her latest scans show significant improvement in brain activity. We'll introduce the children as family friends again," this explanation seeming to satisfy the nurse who left them, with instructions to use the call button if needed. Tyler approached Grace's bedside with the items they'd brought from home. "Hi, Grace. We brought some of your things to help you remember." He placed the music box on the bedside table and wound it, filling the room with its gentle melody. Lily carefully positioned the stuffed rabbit next to Grace's pillow. "This is your bunny," she said softly. "He missed you." Will watched, heart in his throat, as the children continued their gentle interactions with Grace, showing her the photos, describing the colors in her bracelet, creating a bubble of normalcy in the sterile hospital environment. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about their matter-of-fact approach to Grace's condition, free from the adult complications of grief, guilt, and desperation that had colored Will's own interactions. Dr. Harrison arrived midway through their visit, accompanied by a neurological specialist Will hadn't met before, Dr. Abernathy, an older woman with a British accent and penetrating eyes. "Mr. Calloway," Dr. Harrison greeted him, "I hope you don't mind, but I've asked Dr. Abernathy to consult on Grace's case. She specializes in pediatric consciousness disorders and recovery patterns." Dr. Abernathy observed the scene, the children at Grace's bedside, the personal items arranged around her, with professional interest. "I understand there's been remarkable progress in the last 48 hours, she said. Dr. Harrison reviewed Grace's chart with his colleague, speaking in medical terminology that Will had become surprisingly fluent in over the past months. The children continued their quiet interaction with Grace, seemingly unperturbed by the doctor's presence. "I'd like to conduct a few assessments, if that's all right," Dr. Abernathy said finally. "Nothing invasive, just some response tests." Will nodded his permission, stepping back to give the doctor's room. Tyler and Lily moved to stand beside him, watching with solemn attention. Dr. Abernathy spoke to Grace in a clear, gentle voice. "Hello, Grace. I'm Dr. Abernathy. I'm going to hold your hand now, and I'd like you to squeeze my fingers if you can hear me." Will held his breath, having witnessed this same test dozens of times with minimal response. This time, however, there was a visible movement, slight but undeniable. Grace's fingers curled weakly around the doctor's. "Excellent," Dr. Abernathy said calmly, though her eyes showed professional excitement. She proceeded through a series of simple commands. "Move your toes. Blink if you can hear me," each met with small but purposeful responses. "Mr. Calloway, would you come here, please?" she requested. "Try asking her a question, something personal." Will moved to Grace's side, taking her hand. "Grace, princess, can you hear Daddy?" His voice broke slightly on the endearment. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." The pressure of Grace's fingers against his was faint but unmistakable. Will felt tears spring to his eyes. "Very good," Dr. Abernathy said. She turned to Tyler and Lily, who were watching with wide eyes. "Would either of you like to try?" Tyler approached without hesitation. "Grace, it's Tyler. Can you blink for me?" Grace's eyelids fluttered, then opened briefly, unfocused but responsive. "Hello," Tyler said simply, as if they were meeting for the first time. "It's nice to see you." Dr. Abernathy's expression remained professionally composed, but Will caught the look she exchanged with Dr. Harrison, equal parts surprise and interest. "And who is this?" she asked, indicating Lily. "This is my sister Lily," Tyler explained. "She sang to Grace yesterday." Dr. Abernathy nodded encouragingly to Lily. "Would you like to sing again? Music can be very effective in reaching patients in minimally conscious states." Lily moved closer to the bed, her initial shyness giving way to purpose. She began to sing the same lullaby from the previous day, her voice clear and sweet in the hushed room. The response was immediate and dramatic. Grace's eyes opened fully this time, tracking toward the sound of Lily's voice. Her lips moved slightly, not quite forming words but clearly attempting communication. Dr. Abernathy quickly made notes on her tablet, while Dr. Harrison checked Grace's vital signs with barely concealed excitement. "Extraordinary," Dr. Abernathy murmured. "The auditory pathway seems to be functioning well ahead of other neural systems." She turned to Will. "Mr. Calloway, I believe Grace is emerging from her minimally conscious state much more rapidly than expected. Her responses are purposeful and increasing in complexity." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Will asked, the same question he'd posed to Dr. Harrison the previous day. "It means she's waking up," Dr. Abernathy said simply. "Not all at once and not without challenges ahead, but the trajectory is remarkably positive. I'd like to modify her treatment plan to include more sensory stimulation, music, familiar voices, touch. And I'd strongly recommend continuing whatever you've been doing these past 2 days." Her gaze flickered to Tyler and Lily, who had returned to Grace's bedside. After the doctors departed, promising to return later with an updated care plan, Will sat beside Grace's bed, overwhelmed by the sudden acceleration of hope. For weeks he had clung to the smallest signs, a change in breathing pattern, a possible reaction to pain stimuli, desperate for any indication that Grace was still present, still fighting. Now in the space of 48 hours, they had witnessed responsiveness that the specialists had projected might take months, if it happened at all. And the catalyst for this change was undeniably the presence of Tyler and Lily. "She really heard me," Lily said wonderingly, breaking into Will's thoughts. "She looked at me when I sang." "She did," Will confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "You're helping her find her way back." Tyler, who had been arranging Grace's personal items more neatly on the bedside table, looked up. "Our mom used to say that love is the strongest medicine. Not instead of doctors and stuff," he added quickly, "but along with them." Will considered the boy's words, thinking of the millions he'd spent on experimental treatments and specialists from around the world. None had produced the response that these children had elicited, with nothing more than genuine care and simple human connection. The thought was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, the sound of hurried footsteps. The door to Grace's room opened abruptly, revealing a tall, elegantly dressed woman, whose face Will knew as well as his own, despite not having seen it in nearly 2 years. "Rebecca," he said, rising from his chair in shock. Rebecca Anderson, formerly Calloway, stood framed in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of determination and uncertainty. Her gaze went immediately to Grace, then registered the presence of Tyler and Lily with obvious confusion. "Will," she said coolly. "I came as soon as I heard about the improvement." She moved into the room, her designer heels clicking on the linoleum floor. "I had to find out from Sandra Mitchell at a charity luncheon that my daughter is waking up." Will winced at the justified accusation. He should have called Rebecca when Grace began showing signs of recovery, regardless of the strained terms of their separation. But after months of her absence, explained with claims of being unable to bear seeing Grace that way, he had relegated his ex-wife to the periphery of his concerns. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. Whatever their differences, Rebecca was Grace's mother. Things have been happening quickly. Grace is showing significant responsiveness just in the last 2 days. Rebecca approached the bed cautiously, her perfectly manicured hand reaching out to touch Grace's arm. "My baby," she whispered, her composure cracking slightly. Tyler and Lily had drawn back against the wall, sensing the sudden tension in the room. Will realized introductions were necessary. "Rebecca, this is Tyler and Lily Mason. They've been—" How to explain their presence without sounding like he'd lost his mind. "Helping with Grace's recovery." Rebecca turned, really seeing the children for the first time. "Helping how?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was humoring Will rather than taking his statement seriously. Before Will could answer, Tyler stepped forward with his characteristic directness. "Grace responds to us, especially to Lily's singing. The doctor said it's helping her wake up faster." Rebecca blinked, clearly taken aback by both the straightforward response and its source. "I see, and you are—" "Friends," Will interjected. "They're staying with me for a while." Rebecca's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose, but to her credit she didn't pursue the matter further in front of the children. Instead, she turned back to Grace, stroking her hair with gentle fingers. "Mommy's here now, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." The declaration hung in the air, loaded with implications. Will felt a complex surge of emotions: resentment at Rebecca's sudden reappearance after months of absence, concern about how her presence would affect the fragile progress they'd made, and most surprisingly, a flicker of relief at not bearing the full weight of Grace's recovery alone. "Perhaps the children could give us a moment?" Rebecca suggested, her tone making it clear this wasn't really a request. Will hesitated, reluctant to disrupt the positive dynamic that had been developing in Grace's room. But he also recognized the validity of Rebecca's desire for privacy with their daughter. "Tyler, Lily," he said gently, "would you mind getting something from the cafeteria with me? We'll come back in a little while." Tyler looked at him searchingly, then nodded. Sure, Lily was getting hungry anyway. As they left the room, Will cast one last glance at Rebecca, sitting beside Grace's bed, her posture perfect even in grief, her hand resting protectively on their daughter's arm. Whatever her faults, and there had been many on both sides of their failed marriage, she loved Grace, that at least had never been in question. In the elevator, Tyler broke the silence. "That was Grace's mom?" "Yes," Will confirmed. "She and I are divorced, separated about 2 years now." "She didn't know about us," Tyler observed. "It wasn't an accusation, simply a statement of fact." "No," Will admitted. "It's complicated." Tyler accepted this with a small nod. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain things. The simple truth of this observation startled a laugh from Will, the first genuine laugh he could remember in months. "You're right," he acknowledged. "The less complicated version is that Rebecca and I didn't end things well, and we haven't been good at communicating since then. She's been away during most of Grace's hospitalization." "But she came back now that Grace is getting better," Lily piped up from Will's other side. "That's good, right?" "Grace needs her mom." The uncomplicated wisdom of children, Will thought. Of course, Grace needed her mother, regardless of the adult complications surrounding her parents' relationship. "Yes," he said finally, "it's good that she's here." In the cafeteria, over ice cream that passed for lunch, given the extraordinary circumstances, Will found himself explaining more about his relationship with Rebecca than he had to anyone in years. The children listened with serious attention, occasionally asking questions with their characteristic directness, but never judging. "So she left because you worked too much," Tyler summarized. Will winced at the oversimplification, though it contained a kernel of truth. "Partly, and partly because we both changed over time and weren't good at talking about it. And partly because sometimes adults make choices based on what they think will make them happy, even when those choices hurt other people. Like our dad, Lily said matter-of-factly, licking chocolate ice cream from her spoon. Will nodded, heart aching for these children who had experienced adult abandonment, far more devastating than the civilized separation he and Rebecca had arranged, complete with lawyers and asset divisions. Will Grace have to choose who to live with when she wakes up? Tyler asked, cutting to the heart of a question Will had been avoiding. I don't know, Will admitted. That's something Rebecca and I will have to figure out together. As they made their way back to Grace's room, Will braced himself for the conversation that awaited with Rebecca. He had no illusions that her return would be without complications. For himself, for Grace, and now for Tyler and Lily, whose precarious new place in their lives was suddenly thrown into question by the reappearance of Grace's mother. Yet despite these concerns, Will felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The past 3 days had shaken loose something calcified within him, some rigid adherence to control and predictability that had governed his life for decades. In its place was a new willingness to navigate uncertainty, guided by nothing more than the conviction that Tyler had expressed so simply: love is the strongest medicine. Rebecca was seated exactly where they had left her, one hand still resting on Grace's arm, the other scrolling through her phone. She looked up as they entered, her expression unreadable. I spoke with Dr. Harrison, she said to Will, ignoring the children for the moment. He says Grace could be ready for transfer to a rehabilitation facility within weeks, possibly even days. I've already called Brookside Center. They have an excellent pediatric program. Will felt a flare of irritation at Rebecca's presumption of decision-making authority after months of absence, but he tempered his response. I think it's a bit early to be making those plans. Grace is just beginning to show responsiveness, which is precisely why we need to be proactive about the next phase of her recovery, Rebecca countered. She glanced at Tyler and Lily, who had taken seats in the corner of the room. Will, could we discuss this privately? Will shook his head. Whatever you have to say can be said here. Tyler and Lily have been instrumental in Grace's progress. They're part of this conversation. Rebecca's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly, but she adjusted her approach. Fine. As I was saying, Brookside is the premier rehabilitation facility in the Northeast. They specialize in cases exactly like Grace's. I'm familiar with Brookside, Will said, but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Dr. Abernathy suggested continuing with what's been working, familiar environment. Voices, music. Dr. Abernathy isn't Grace's primary physician, Rebecca pointed out, and with all due respect to your guests, Grace needs professional care, not well-intentioned amateurs. Tyler shifted in his seat but remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. Lily leaned against her brother, her eyes moving between the adults like a spectator at a tennis match. Before Will could respond, Grace made a small sound, not quite a word, but clearly an attempt at vocalization. All eyes turned to her immediately. Grace? Rebecca leaned closer, her perfectly manicured hand smoothing her daughter's hair. Darling, can you hear me? It's Mommy! Grace's eyelids fluttered, then opened partially. Her gaze was unfocused at first, then seemed to search the room before settling on Rebecca's face with a hint of recognition. Ma. The sound was barely audible, more breath than word, but unmistakable. Rebecca's composure cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, baby, it's Mommy. I'm here now. Will moved to Grace's other side, his heart hammering. Grace, princess? Daddy's here too. Grace's eyes shifted toward his voice, the movement clearly purposeful though sluggish. Her lips moved again, though no sound emerged this time. Tyler stood and approached the bed, Lily following close behind. She's trying to say something else, he observed quietly. Rebecca looked up, irritation flashing across her features at the interruption of the moment. But before she could speak, Grace's eyes had tracked to the sound of Tyler's voice, fixing on him with evident focus. H. Grace struggled, her brow furrowing with concentration. Here, yes, Tyler said simply. We're all here. Grace's hand moved slightly on the blanket, not reaching exactly, but seeking. Lily stepped forward instinctively and placed her small hand over Grace's. Hi, Grace, she said with childlike directness. Do you remember me singing to you? A ghost of a smile flickered across Grace's face, brief but unmistakable. Her eyes remained on Lily for a long moment, before drifting closed, the effort of consciousness clearly exhausting. Dr. Harrison entered, having been alerted by the monitoring system that showed changes in Grace's vital signs. "I understand we had some vocalization?" he asked, moving efficiently to check Grace's responses. "She recognized me," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "She called me Mommy. And she seemed to recognize the children as well," Will added, unwilling to have Tyler and Lily's contribution minimized. Dr. Harrison nodded, making notes on his tablet. "This is excellent progress. Recognition of familiar faces is a significant milestone in recovery from prolonged unconsciousness." He performed a quick neurological assessment, then stepped back with evident satisfaction. "I'm going to order a new series of cognitive function tests. If this level of responsiveness continues, we can start discussing transition plans." After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Rebecca studied Tyler and Lily with new intensity, as if reassessing their role in the situation. "How exactly did you become involved with my daughter's care?" she asked finally, her tone neutral but her gaze sharp. Will opened his mouth to answer, but Tyler spoke first. "I was praying for her in the hallway. Mr. Calloway Will saw me and invited me in. Grace responded when I talked to her, and even more when Lily sang." "You were praying?" Rebecca's tone made it clear how little stock she put in such interventions. She turned to Will. "And based on this, you decided to what? Adopt them?" "They're staying with me temporarily," Will said firmly. "Their presence has been beneficial for Grace, as you just witnessed. Dr. Abernathy believes their continued involvement will aid her recovery." "And after that?" Rebecca asked pointedly. "What's your long-term plan here, Will?" The question struck at the heart of something Will had been avoiding thinking about too deeply. What was his plan beyond Grace's immediate recovery? What responsibility did he have toward Tyler and Lily once their role in Grace's awakening was complete? "We're taking things one day at a time," he said finally. "Right now the focus is on Grace." Rebecca studied him with the penetrating gaze that had once made her such a formidable partner in both marriage and business. "You've changed," she said finally, not unkindly. "The Will I knew wouldn't make such an impulsive decision. Maybe that Will needed to change," he answered quietly. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps so." She glanced at her watch, a Cartier piece Will recognized as having been a gift for their 10th anniversary. "I have a meeting with my attorney at 4. I'll be back this evening." She stood, gathering her designer handbag. "We still need to discuss rehabilitation options, Will, and other arrangements." The implication was clear. Rebecca intended to resume an active role in Grace's life, with all the complications that would entail. After she left, Lily broke the tension with a child's innocent observation. "Grace's mommy wears very pointy shoes." Will couldn't help laughing, the absurd accuracy of the statement cutting through his anxiety about Rebecca's reappearance. "Yes, she always has. She says they make her taller in business meetings." "Did you love her a lot?" Lily asked, the question flying directly from thought to speech as only a child's can. Will considered how to answer. "Yes," he said finally. "I did, very much. But sometimes love isn't enough to keep people together if they want different things." Tyler, who had been arranging the get-well cards on Grace's windowsill, spoke without turning around. "Our mom said that about our dad, that he loved us but wanted different things." Will heard the unspoken question in the boy's statement. "Adults make mistakes, Tyler, sometimes terrible ones. But what happened with your father says more about him than about you or Lily. You deserve to be loved consistently, not just when it's convenient." Tyler nodded, absorbing this. "Grace is lucky to have both her parents, even if you don't live together." "Yes," Will agreed, struck by the child's generosity of spirit. "She is." The afternoon passed in a new rhythm, Grace drifting in and out of consciousness, each period of wakefulness slightly longer and more focused than the last. By early evening, she had managed several more words. Thirsty, tired, and most heart-stoppingly for Will. Daddy in a clear, if raspy, voice. Dr. Abernathy returned to conduct additional assessments, her quiet expertise reassuring as she guided Grace through simple cognitive tests. "Remarkable progress," she murmured, more to herself than to the others in the room. "The neural pathways are re-establishing much more rapidly than expected." Is that unusual? Will asked. In my experience, yes. Dr. Abernathy regarded him thoughtfully. Recovery from prolonged unconsciousness is rarely linear. We typically see plateaus, regressions, slow incremental gains. Grace is showing an almost textbook awakening pattern, but at an accelerated rate. She glanced at Tyler and Lily, who were reading a book together in the corner. I understand there have been some unconventional elements to her care recently. Will explained the children's involvement, feeling oddly defensive despite the obvious positive results. They connected with her somehow. I can't explain it scientifically. Dr. Abernathy smiled slightly. Mr. Calloway, I've been practicing neurology for 30 years. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the human brain contains more mysteries than science has yet unraveled. Connection, comfort, familiarity, these aren't merely psychological factors. They influence neurochemistry, hormone levels, stress responses, all of which impact recovery. So you don't find it strange that I've brought these children into Grace's recovery process? Unstrange? Perhaps ineffective? Clearly not. She made a final note in Grace's chart. I recommend continuing all aspects of the current approach. Grace is responding extraordinarily well. As evening settled over Boston Memorial, the pediatric floor quieted. Rebecca had called to say she would return in the morning rather than that night. A business dinner she couldn't reschedule, she explained. Will found himself oddly relieved at the postponement of their inevitable discussions about Grace's future care. Nurse Ellen returned for the night shift, bringing extra blankets for Will and the children. Dr. Harrison approved overnight stays given the positive response patterns, she explained. There's a recliner and a cot we can bring in. Tyler insisted that Lily take the cot, while he would sleep in one of the chairs. Will tried to persuade the boy to share the recliner, but Tyler shook his head. I'm used to sleeping sitting up. At the shelter, sometimes all the beds were full. The matter-of-fact statement sent another pang through Will's heart. These children had adapted to deprivation with a resilience most adults would envy. As night deepened, Grace slept peacefully, her monitors showing normal patterns for the first time in months. Lily drifted off quickly on the cot, clutching the stuffed rabbit they'd brought from Grace's room. Tyler remained awake longer, watching Grace with solemn attention. She's having good dreams now, he said quietly to Will. You can tell because her eyes move differently. Will nodded, having learned to read the subtle signs of REM sleep during his long vigil at Grace's bedside. How did you get so wise about these things, Tyler? The boy shrugged. I watched a lot when my mom was sick. The nurses explained stuff to me because they knew I was taking care of Lily. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to bear such responsibility, Will thought. Yet Tyler had risen to it with extraordinary grace and maturity. Your mother would be very proud of you, Will said softly. Of both of you. Tyler's expression flickered briefly, a moment of unguarded emotion before his composure returned. I hope so. I promised her I'd take care of Lily no matter what. You're doing an amazing job, Will assured him. But it's okay to let adults help sometimes too. That's what we're supposed to be for. Tyler considered this, then nodded slowly. I guess that's true. He settled more comfortably in his chair, his eyelids growing heavy. Good night, Will. Good night, Tyler. As the children slept, Will maintained his vigil beside Grace, the familiar beeping of monitors, now a reassurance rather than a reminder of crisis. His phone vibrated silently in his pocket. Charles Blackwood again, likely with more thinly veiled threats about the board meeting. Will ignored it, focusing instead on the peaceful faces of the 3 children now in his care. Tomorrow would bring complications. Rebecca's return meant difficult conversations about custody, medical decisions, and the future. The office demanded his attention, with Charles circling like a shark scenting blood in the water. The question of Tyler and Lily's long-term situation remained unanswered, but tonight, in the quiet of room 412, something like peace had descended. Grace was finding her way back, one word and gesture at a time. Tyler and Lily had found temporary safety and purpose. And Will. Will had found something he hadn't realized he'd lost, the capacity to put love before ambition, connection before control. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound from Grace's bed, not distress, but a murmur as she shifted slightly in her sleep. Her hand moved across the blanket, coming to rest near the edge of the bed. Without fully waking, Will reached out and took it gently in his own. I'm here, Princess, he whispered. We're all here, Grace's fingers curled weakly around his, a grip that felt like promise. Dawn was breaking when Will was jolted awake by the sound of alarms. For a moment his heart stopped. 3 months of medical emergencies had conditioned him to fear the worst. But as consciousness returned fully, he realized the sound wasn't coming from Grace's monitors, which showed stable readings. It was a code being called elsewhere on the floor. Ellen rushed in, checking Grace's status with professional efficiency. "Everything's stable here," she confirmed. "The code is in 419. Dr. Martinez is handling it." Will nodded, relief washing over him. Tyler was already awake, alert despite the early hour, while Lily still slept soundly on the cot. "Any changes overnight?" Ellen asked, reviewing Grace's chart. "Nothing significant," Will answered. "She seemed to sleep peacefully." Ellen smiled. "That's progress in itself. Restful sleep is healing." As she completed her assessment, Dr. Harrison arrived for morning rounds accompanied by 2 residents. They reviewed Grace's status in hushed tones, mindful of her sleep. "I'd like to reduce sedation further today," Dr. Harrison decided. "Her brain activity suggests she's ready for more extended periods of wakefulness." As if responding to his words, Grace stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment she seemed disoriented, gaze wandering across the ceiling. Then her eyes found Will and something remarkable happened. She smiled. It was a small expression, barely more than a twitch of her lips, but it was deliberate and recognizable. "Good morning, Princess," Will said, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy," Grace managed, the word clearer than the day before. Dr. Harrison moved to the bedside, conducting a quick neurological check with evident excitement. "Grace, can you tell me how many fingers I'm holding up?" he asked, displaying 2 fingers. Grace's brow furrowed in concentration. "T2," she whispered after a moment. The doctor's professional demeanor cracked slightly, a broad smile breaking through. "Excellent. That's exactly right." Tyler had approached the bed quietly, Lily now awake and beside him. Grace's eyes tracked to them, recognition dawning slowly. "Friends," she said, the word halting but distinct. "Yes," Tyler confirmed. "We're your friends." Dr. Harrison continued with simple cognitive tests, asking Grace to follow his finger with her eyes, to squeeze his hand when he counted to 3, to tell him what color his tie was. Each response was slow but accurate, demonstrating not just consciousness but comprehension. "This is extraordinary progress," he told Will when they stepped into the hallway for a private conversation. "Based on this morning's assessment, I believe Grace is ready to be classified as having emerged from her minimally conscious state. She's demonstrating consistent command following, verbal responses, and recognition of familiar people." "What does this mean for her recovery timeline?" Will asked, hope and caution warring within him. "It's still early to make definitive predictions, but this rate of progress is extremely promising. We'll want to begin physical therapy to address muscle atrophy, speech therapy for the mild dysarthria you're hearing, and cognitive rehabilitation to help with any memory or processing issues." Dr. Harrison hesitated. "Has Ms. Anderson discussed Brookside with you?" Will nodded, tension returning at the mention of Rebecca's plans. "She mentioned it yesterday." "It's an excellent facility," the doctor said carefully, clearly trying to remain neutral in what he recognized as a potentially contentious parental decision. "However, given Grace's current trajectory, I'm not convinced an immediate transfer is necessary. Her response to her current environment and care team has been remarkably positive." "Including Tyler and Lily?" Will asked directly. Dr. Harrison smiled slightly. "Including all elements of her current support system. I've noted their presence in her chart as consistent positive social engagement factors." Will thanked him for his candor, recognizing the doctor had essentially provided medical backing for his instinct to maintain the status quo, rather than rushing into Rebecca's rehabilitation plan. When he returned to Grace's room, he found her more fully awake, watching as Lily arranged the stuffed animals they'd brought from home in a semicircle on the bed. "Soft," Grace said, touching the rabbit's ear with tentative fingers. "His name is Blue," Lily informed her, "because of his ribbon. You've had him since you were really little." Grace nodded slowly, processing this information about her own history. Memory formation and retrieval were complex functions. Dr. Harrison had explained, Some memories from before the accident might be temporarily or permanently inaccessible, while others would return in unpredictable patterns. "Home?" Grace asked, looking at Will with questioning eyes. "Yes, Princess. Blue is from your room at home. You'll be going back there soon." "When?" The simple question contained volumes. Hope, uncertainty, impatience. "When the doctors say you're ready," Will answered. "I'll need to get a little stronger first." Grace seemed to accept this, turning her attention back to Lily, who had begun telling an elaborate story involving the stuffed rabbit and a bear from the hospital gift shop. Tyler sat nearby, occasionally contributing to the narrative but mostly watching his sister with quiet pride. Will observed the scene with a sense of wonder. 3 days ago, Grace had been locked in unconsciousness. Lily and Tyler had been living in a shelter with uncertain futures, and he himself had been a shell of a person, going through the motions of hope while privately preparing for worst-case scenarios. Now, on this ordinary Wednesday morning, something like joy had crept back into the universe. His contemplation was interrupted by Ellen, who entered with an uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Calloway, there's someone asking to see you. Mr. Blackwood. He's rather insistent." Will felt cold dread replace the warmth of the moment. "Charles here at the hospital? Nothing good could come of that." "I'll be right there," he said, turning to Tyler. "Can you stay with Grace for a few minutes?" Tyler nodded, his expression serious. "Is everything okay?" "Just a colleague from work," Will assured him, though the tightness in his voice betrayed his concern. "I won't be long." In the hallway, Charles Blackwood stood with the stiff discomfort of someone unaccustomed to hospital environments. His tailored suit and leather briefcase looked out of place among scrubs and medical equipment. "Charles," Will greeted him coolly. "This is unexpected." "Desperate times," Charles replied, gesturing toward an empty waiting area. "We should talk privately." Once seated in the small room, Charles wasted no time on pleasantries. "The board is convening an emergency session this afternoon. I thought you should hear it from me first." "On what grounds?" Will demanded, though he already knew the answer. "Fitness for leadership," Charles said bluntly. "Your extended absence, coupled with concerning personal decisions, has raised questions about your judgment." "Concerning personal decisions," Will repeated flatly. "You mean taking in Tyler and Lily?" Charles nodded. "Among other things, the timing of this arrangement, coinciding with Grace's medical crisis, suggests emotional decision-making rather than the rational leadership our investors expect." "Grace is showing remarkable improvement," Will countered. "The medical team attributes part of that to the children's presence." "I'm genuinely pleased to hear about Grace's progress," Charles said, his tone suggesting limited sincerity. "But that doesn't change the facts. You've effectively abandoned your responsibilities to the firm for 3 months, and now you've taken in strange children with no background checks, no legal process, during an intensely vulnerable period. The board is concerned, Will, as am I." Will studied the man across from him, his late partner's brother, never quite as skilled or visionary as Robert, always slightly resentful of Will's closer relationship with him. Now Charles saw his opportunity to claim what he'd always believed should have been his, control of Calloway Investments. "What exactly are you proposing, Charles?" "A temporary leadership transition," Charles said smoothly. 3 months, perhaps 6, to allow you to focus on Grace's recovery without the pressures of the firm. I'd step in as acting CEO with your title and equity position preserved, of course. The offer was reasonable on its face, considerate even if one didn't understand the internal politics of the firm. But Will knew better. Once Charles had control, finding reasons to extend the temporary arrangement would be trivial. "And if I refuse?" Charles's expression hardened. "Then the board votes this afternoon. With your proxy rights limited by the ethics clause in the partnership agreement, I believe the outcome is predictable." Will felt cold anger rising within him. The ethics clause was rarely invoked, a provision allowing a partner's voting rights to be temporarily suspended if their judgment was deemed compromised. It was meant for cases of addiction or criminal activity, not for a father prioritizing his daughter's recovery. "You've been planning this for a while," Will observed. Charles didn't deny it. "I've been concerned about the direction of the firm for some time. This situation merely brought matters to a head." "I'll be at the meeting," Will said firmly. 3 o'clock? 3:30. Conference room A. Charles stood, adjusting his cuffs. I truly am glad about Grace's improvement, Will. Despite our differences, I would never wish harm on Robert's niece. The mention of his late partner's name in this context felt like a low blow. Robert would have been disgusted by his brother's power play during a family medical crisis. As Charles departed, Will remained in the waiting room, mind racing. He could fight this, call in favors from other board members, leverage his personal relationships with major investors, but the cost would be time away from Grace during this critical period of her recovery. And even if he won, the firm would be divided, with factions forming around him and Charles. For the first time in his career, Will found himself questioning whether the battle was worth fighting at all. When Will returned to Grace's room, he found Rebecca had arrived in his absence. She was seated beside the bed, elegant as always in a tailored navy dress, her hand resting lightly on Grace's arm as she spoke in a soft, animated voice. Tyler and Lily had retreated to the window seat, observing the mother-daughter reunion with quiet curiosity. "There you are," Rebecca said, looking up as Will entered. "Grace has been asking for you." Grace turned toward him, her face brightening with recognition. "Daddy," she said, the word clearer than before, though still requiring visible effort. "Hey, Princess," Will said, pushing aside his concerns about Charles and the board meeting. "Sorry I had to step out. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Grace answered honestly. "But better." Rebecca smoothed Grace's hair with practiced tenderness. "Dr. Harrison was just here. He says Grace might be able to try some pureed food today." "Real food after all this time." Will smiled, genuinely pleased by this milestone. "That's wonderful news." "I've also been speaking with the director of Brookside," Rebecca continued. "They can accommodate us as early as next week if Grace continues to progress at this rate." Will felt his jaw tighten. "I think that's premature. Dr. Harrison just told me he isn't convinced an immediate transfer is necessary." "Of course it's necessary," Rebecca countered. "Grace needs specialized rehabilitation, physical therapy, cognitive assessment, speech therapy. Brookside is designed specifically for pediatric recovery. All of which can begin here," Will pointed out. "Dr. Harrison has already ordered consults with the relevant specialists." Rebecca glanced meaningfully at Tyler and Lily, lowering her voice. "Will, I understand you've developed some attachment to these children, but Grace's recovery needs to be guided by medical professionals, not well-meaning amateurs. They're not mutually exclusive approaches," Will argued, keeping his tone level for Grace's sake. "Grace is responding to them. Dr. Abernathy specifically noted their positive influence." "Dr. Abernathy is a consultant, not Grace's primary physician." "Who children?" Grace interrupted, her gaze moving between her parents with growing awareness of the tension. Rebecca looked startled, as if she'd forgotten Grace's comprehension was improving by the hour. "Just some friends of your father's, darling. Nothing for you to worry about." "Not worry," Grace said with effort. "No." Will moved to the other side of the bed, including Tyler and Lily in his gesture. "Grace, this is Tyler and his sister Lily. They've been visiting you and helping you get better." Grace studied the children with increasing focus, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Remember, singing," she said finally, looking at Lily. Lily nodded, moving closer to the bed. "I sang you a lullaby. The one my mom taught me." A ghost of a smile crossed Grace's face. "Pretty." Her gaze shifted to Tyler. "And praying?" Tyler looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, I was praying for you to wake up." "Worked," Grace said simply. Rebecca watched this exchange with a complex expression, part maternal protectiveness, part irritation at being sidelined, part reluctant acknowledgement of the evident connection between Grace and these unknown children. "Well," she said finally, her social polish reasserting itself, "we're all very grateful for your kindness. Now Grace needs to rest, and I'm sure you children have other activities." "Stay," Grace interrupted with unexpected firmness. "Please." The directness of the request silenced Rebecca momentarily. Will felt a surge of pride at his daughter's assertiveness, a trait she'd inherited from both parents, but which had particularly emerged in the months before the accident. "Perhaps we should let Grace decide who she wants with her," Will suggested gently. "Within reason, of course." Rebecca's expression tightened, but she nodded with visible effort. Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable, darling. She turned to Will. Could we speak outside for a moment? In the hallway, Rebecca's composed facade cracked slightly. What exactly is going on, Will? 3 days ago, I get a call that Grace is showing signs of improvement. I arrived to find you've essentially adopted 2 shelter children who are now apparently instrumental in her recovery. You must see how unusual this appears. Will sighed, running a hand through his hair. It does sound bizarre when you put it that way, but the results speak for themselves. Grace is recovering more rapidly than anyone predicted, and Tyler and Lily's presence is a factor. According to whom? Dr. Abernathy, for one. Ellen Patterson, who's been Grace's primary nurse since the beginning. Dr. Harrison hasn't explicitly credited them, but he acknowledged the positive social engagement factors in her environment. Rebecca studied him with the penetrating gaze that had made her such a formidable corporate attorney. And what happens when Grace is fully recovered? What's your plan for these children, then? The same question Tyler had asked, Will realized. The same question he'd been avoiding answering definitively. They'll always have a place with us. With me, he corrected quickly, seeing Rebecca's expression. I've given my word on that. Beyond that, we'll figure it out as we go. Rebecca shook her head slightly. The Will I knew didn't figure things out as he went. He had 5-year plans and contingency strategies for every scenario. Maybe that Will wasn't as effective as he thought, he replied quietly. Something in Rebecca's expression softened. Perhaps not. She hesitated, then added, Charles called me last night. He mentioned the board meeting. Will felt a flare of anger. Of course he did. Trying to build his coalition. Actually, no, Rebecca said. He seemed to think I might persuade you to accept his temporary leadership proposal. And will you try? Rebecca laughed, a genuine sound that reminded Will of earlier, happier times between them. Hardly. Charles Blackwood has been gunning for your position since Robert passed. I told him in rather specific legal terms what he could do with his proposal. Will couldn't help smiling. Rebecca's formidable vocabulary when provoked had always been impressive. Thank you for that. I may have left our marriage, Will, but I haven't forgotten who built that firm into what it is today. It certainly wasn't Charles. Her expression grew more serious. That said, you do need to decide what you want. The firm, Grace's recovery, these children, something has to give. The blunt assessment hit home. For 20 years, Will had operated under the assumption that with enough efficiency, enough delegation, enough sheer force of will, he could have everything: career success, family life, personal fulfillment. The illusion had begun cracking when Rebecca left, but Grace's accident had shattered it completely. I know, he acknowledged. I'm going to the board meeting this afternoon. After that, we'll see. Rebecca nodded, accepting this for the moment. As for Grace, I'm willing to postpone discussions about Brookside for now. But we do need a comprehensive rehabilitation plan, and soon. Agreed, Will said, relieved at this temporary ceasefire. Shall we go back in? Inside Grace's room, they found a scene that stopped them both in the doorway. Lily was sitting carefully on the edge of Grace's bed, singing the lullaby that had first triggered Grace's response. Tyler stood nearby, turning the pages of a picture book in time with his sister's song. Grace's eyes were fixed on Lily, her expression more relaxed and engaged than Will had seen since the accident. More remarkably, Grace was attempting to hum along, the notes uneven and raspy from disuse, but clearly an intentional effort to participate. Rebecca's hand found Will's arm, gripping it tightly. "My God," she whispered. Ellen appeared beside them, her professional demeanor softened by evident emotion. "She's been doing this for about 5 minutes," she said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it." The conscious effort to join in. It's extraordinary. When the song ended, Grace looked up and noticed her parents in the doorway. "Mommy, Daddy." "I remember. This song." Rebecca moved swiftly to the bedside, tears threatening her perfect makeup. "You do? From where, sweetheart?" Grace's brow furrowed with concentration. "Grandma sang it when I was sick." Will and Rebecca exchanged startled glances. Rebecca's mother had indeed sung to Grace during a bout of pneumonia when she was 4, but the memory was from years before the accident, an indication that older memory pathways were reactivating. "That's right," Rebecca confirmed, voice thick with emotion. Grandma Jean sang it to help you feel better. Grace nodded slowly, the effort of recollection clearly taxing. Like Lily, singing now. Exactly like that, Will agreed, his heart full as he watched this miracle of neural reconnection happening before his eyes. The morning passed in a blur of medical assessments, small victories and cautious celebration. Grace managed several spoonfuls of applesauce, her first real food in months, and stayed awake for nearly 3 consecutive hours, a significant improvement in her stamina. Tyler and Lily remained constant presences, Lily sharing songs and simple stories, Tyler reading aloud from books the hospital child life specialist had brought. Rebecca observed it all with complex emotions, evident in her expression. Joy at Grace's progress, wariness about the unconventional situation, and something else Will recognized from their marriage, competitive concern about her place in Grace's affections after months of absence. At one point, when Grace had drifted into a light nap, Rebecca pulled Will aside again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about maintaining the current approach to Grace's care." Will nodded, waiting. "I've made some calls. I can take a leave of absence from the firm for at least a month, possibly longer. I'd like to be actively involved in Grace's recovery." She hesitated, then added with visible effort, "including working with the children, if they're truly helping her." The concession clearly cost her something in pride, and Will appreciated it. "I think that would be good for Grace," he said sincerely. "She needs both of us right now." "I've also found a short-term rental 2 blocks from your house," Rebecca continued. "Moving in this weekend. I want to be close enough for daily involvement, but—" She trailed off. "But not move back in," Will finished for her. "I understand." An awkward silence fell between them, former partners trying to navigate new roles without old patterns. "I should go," Will said finally, checking his watch. "The board meeting," Rebecca nodded. "I'll stay with Grace. Good luck, Will." As Will gathered his things, Tyler approached him. "Are you going to your work now?" the boy asked. Will nodded. "Yes, there's an important meeting I need to attend." Tyler studied him with that uncanny perceptiveness. "Because of us?" "I heard that man in the hallway. He seemed angry about Lily and me." Will knelt to Tyler's eye level, struck again by the burden of awareness this child carried. "No, not because of you. Charles, the man you saw, has wanted my job for a long time. He's using the situation as an excuse, that's all." "But we are part of it," Tyler persisted. "If you hadn't helped us, he wouldn't have a reason to be mad." "Tyler," Will said firmly, "helping you and Lily was the right thing to do. The best decisions aren't always the easiest ones to explain to others, but I don't regret it for a second." The boy seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Good luck at your meeting." "Thanks. I'll be back as soon as I can." "Take care of Grace and Lily, okay?" Tyler nodded solemnly. "I will." As Will headed toward the elevator, he was surprised to find Rebecca following him. "I thought you were staying with Grace," he said. "Ellen's with her and the children." Rebecca fell into step beside him. "I have a better idea. I'm coming with you to the board meeting." Will stopped short. "What? Why?" "Because I still own 12% of Callaway Investments through our settlement agreement," Rebecca reminded him. "I may have given up my board seat when we divorced, but I'm still a major shareholder. And I think it's time to remind Charles Blackwood exactly whom he's dealing with." Will stared at her, momentarily speechless. Throughout their marriage, Rebecca had been his most formidable ally in business matters. Brilliant, strategic, and utterly fearless in confrontation. They had chosen to separate their professional lives after the divorce to minimize conflict, but her legal expertise and shareholder status remained intact. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "This could get ugly." Rebecca smiled, the particular smile that had struck fear into opposing counsel for 15 years. "I'm counting on it." Conference Room A at Callaway Investments' downtown Boston headquarters hadn't changed in the 3 months since Will had last set foot in the building. The same gleaming mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by the same ergonomic chairs, beneath the same tasteful abstract artwork, selected by an interior designer to convey stability and success without distraction. What had changed was the atmosphere as Will and Rebecca entered together. The board members, 7 in total, including Charles, had clearly not expected Rebecca's presence. Their expressions ranged from surprise to discomfort, to, in Charles's case, poorly disguised alarm. "Rebecca," Charles recovered first, rising with forced cordiality. "This is unexpected. I wasn't aware you were planning to attend." "Clearly," Rebecca replied pleasantly, taking a seat at Will's right hand. "But as a significant shareholder, with vested interest in the firm's leadership, I thought my perspective might be valuable." Charles glanced at Marjorie Winters, the firm's general counsel, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Rebecca's presence, while surprising, was legally permissible. "Of course," Charles said smoothly. "Always good to have diverse perspectives." He turned to the broader group. "Shall we begin? As you all know, we've convened this emergency session to discuss the leadership situation at Callaway Investments." Will let Charles outline his concerns, maintaining a composed expression as his partner of 15 years described his extended absence, declining focus and concerning personal decisions, in carefully diplomatic language that nonetheless painted a picture of a man in emotional crisis, unfit for leadership. When Charles finally concluded, he turned to Will with practiced compassion. "I want to emphasize that this is not about removing Will permanently. It's about providing him the space to address his family situation without the pressures of daily operations. I'm simply offering to step in temporarily for the good of the firm." Murmurs around the table suggested at least some of the board members found this reasoning persuasive. Will noted who nodded: Peterson and Sandoval, Charles's usual allies, and who remained expressionless Himura and Okafor, typically more independent. "Thank you, Charles, for that creative interpretation of events," Will said finally, his voice steady. "I'd like to offer a different perspective, if I may." He outlined the facts of the past 3 months without embellishment. Grace's condition, the medical prognosis, the delegation structure he'd established to maintain operations in his reduced capacity. He neither apologized for his absence nor minimized it, simply presented it as a necessary response to an extraordinary circumstance. "As for Grace's current condition," he continued, "she has shown remarkable improvement in the past 4 days. She's conscious, communicating, and beginning physical recovery. Her doctors are optimistic about a full recovery, though the timeline remains uncertain." "That's wonderful news, Will," Helena Okafor said warmly. As a mother of 3 herself, she had been particularly sympathetic to Will's situation. "We're all relieved to hear it. Thank you, Helena. Which brings me to the matter of Tyler and Lily Mason." Will described the circumstances of meeting Tyler, the immediate impact on Grace's responsiveness, and his decision to provide temporary housing for the siblings. "This arrangement has been formalized through proper legal channels," he added. "Temporary guardianship papers have been filed with the assistance of family court. Background checks were completed on all household staff. The children are continuing their education at their current schools." Charles leaned forward. "Will, no one is questioning your compassionate intentions, but the timing and impulsivity of this decision, combined with your extended absence from the firm, raises legitimate concerns about judgment and focus." "If I may," Rebecca interjected smoothly. All eyes turned to her, surprise evident at her intervention on Will's behalf. "As Grace's mother and someone who has observed the situation firsthand, I can attest that Will's decision regarding the Mason children, while unconventional, has proven remarkably beneficial for Grace's recovery. Multiple medical professionals have noted their positive influence." Charles looked wrong-footed by Rebecca's support. "Nevertheless, the decision demonstrates an emotional rather than rational approach to problem-solving. In a firm of this size, with the responsibilities we hold toward our investors—" "Oh, spare us the concerned statesman routine, Charles," Rebecca interrupted, her tone sharpening. "This isn't about Will's judgment. It's about the fact that you've wanted his position since Robert passed, and you're using a family medical crisis as leverage." A tense silence fell over the room. Charles's face flushed slightly at having his motives so baldly stated. "That's an unfair characterization," he said stiffly. "Is it?" Rebecca opened the portfolio she'd brought, removing several documents. "Because I've taken the liberty of reviewing the firm's operational metrics for the past quarter. Despite Will's reduced presence, Callaway Investments has outperformed market averages by 12%, closed the Westover acquisition ahead of schedule, and maintained all major client relationships. She slid copies of the analysis to each board member. These are hardly the indicators of a firm suffering from leadership deficits. Will watched with a mixture of admiration and nostalgia as Rebecca systematically dismantled Charles's case point by point. They had been formidable partners once, personally and professionally, and despite the failure of their marriage, her brilliant strategic mind remained unchanged. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, the ethics clause Charles is attempting to invoke was specifically drafted to address cases of criminal activity, substance abuse or mental health crises that render a partner incapable of rational decision-making. A father prioritizing his critically ill child hardly meets that threshold. She fixed Charles with a steely gaze. Attempting to stretch the clause to cover this situation would likely trigger a shareholder derivative suit for breach of fiduciary duty and bad faith governance. As a significant shareholder myself, I can assure you I would support such action. The threat hung in the air, its legal implications clear to everyone present. Marjorie Winters, the general counsel, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Additionally, Will added, seizing the momentum, I recognize that my reduced presence has placed burdens on the executive team. That's why I'm proposing a structured reintegration plan. He distributed his own documents outlining a 4-week schedule for resuming full operational duties while maintaining flexibility for Grace's ongoing care needs. This would begin next Monday, he continued, with 3 days per week in the office, increasing to full-time within the month. Assuming Grace's recovery continues as expected. The board members reviewed the plan, several nodding with evident approval at its thoroughness. A reasonable approach, Javier Sandoval acknowledged, surprising Will. Typically aligned with Charles, Javier was showing unexpected independence. Charles recognized his position weakening. While this plan addresses the immediate concerns about physical presence, he countered, it doesn't resolve the underlying question of focus and judgment. The Mason children situation is a personal matter that has no bearing on Will's professional capabilities, Rebecca cut in, unless you're suggesting the board should now evaluate all executives' family and charitable decisions. Your own support of that controversial political candidate last year might raise some interesting discussions in that case. Charles blanched slightly. His political contributions had caused quiet concern among several board members who found the candidate's positions extreme. Helena Okafor cleared her throat. I believe we have sufficient information to vote on this matter, unless there are other perspectives to consider. No one spoke. Charles's allies seemed unwilling to continue pushing in the face of Rebecca's forceful counter-arguments and the clear lack of consensus. Very well, Helena said. The motion before the board is to temporarily reassign William Calloway's CEO duties under the ethics clause provision. Those in favor? Only Charles's hand rose, joined after an awkward moment by Peterson's half-hearted gesture. Those opposed? The remaining hands, including Sandoval's, rose decisively. Motion fails, Helena announced. Will, we accept your reintegration plan and look forward to having you back in the office next week, she smiled warmly. And please know that the board extends its continued support during Grace's recovery. Charles gathered his papers with stiff movements, his expression tightly controlled. If there's no further business, I move to adjourn. Seconded, Himura said quickly, clearly eager to end the uncomfortable session. As the board members filed out, offering quiet congratulations to Will and inquiries about Grace, Charles approached them with rigid professionalism. Well played, he said tightly. Both of you. It wasn't a game, Charles, Will replied evenly. It was an unnecessary power play during a family medical crisis. Charles's facade cracked slightly. You've been neglecting the firm for months. Someone needed to take action. The firm is doing fine, Rebecca countered, as the metrics clearly show. This was never about the firm's well-being. Charles looked between them, his expression hardening. You know, it's remarkable. Even divorced, you two still manage to present a united front when it suits you. Pity you couldn't make that work in your marriage. He nodded curtly. I'll see you Monday, Will. As Charles departed, Will and Rebecca were left alone in the conference room that had witnessed countless negotiations, strategies and decisions throughout their shared history. Thank you. Will said simply. You didn't have to do that. Rebecca arranged her documents with precise movements. I did, actually. For Grace, if nothing else. She needs stability right now, not a father distracted by corporate warfare. Will nodded, accepting this explanation, though suspecting there might be more to it. Still, I appreciate it. They walked together toward the elevator in companionable silence, former adversaries turned temporary allies by circumstances neither could have predicted. You know, Rebecca said as they waited for the elevator, that reintegration plan of yours is actually quite good. When did you put it together? 3 a.m., Will admitted with a small smile. Watching Grace sleep and wondering what the hell I was going to do about Charles. Rebecca laughed, a genuine sound that reminded Will of earlier, easier times between them. Some things never change. You always did your best strategic thinking in the middle of the night. The elevator arrived and they stepped in together. The familiar descent carrying them away from the corporate battlefield and back toward the hospital where their daughter waited, where the real priorities lay, beyond balance sheets and board votes and professional ambitions. I meant what I said about helping with Grace's recovery, Rebecca said as they reached the lobby, including accepting Tyler and Lily's role in it. I know, Will said, and I meant what I said about needing you there. Grace needs both of us right now. They stepped out into the bright Boston afternoon, former partners navigating a new path forward, not for themselves, but for the daughter they both loved, and the unexpected allies who had helped bring her back from the darkness. 5 years later. The autumn sunshine streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Boston Memorial Hospital's newest addition, the Elaine Mason Center for Neurological Recovery and Family Support. The state-of-the-art facility gleamed with purpose, its modern architecture softened by thoughtfully designed spaces for healing, connection, and hope. In the center's main atrium, a gathering had assembled for the official dedication ceremony. Hospital administrators in formal attire, medical staff in white coats, donors with discreet name badges, and families whose lives had been touched by neurological trauma, all united by the common purpose that had brought this center into existence. At the podium, Dr. Harrison, now the center's inaugural director, adjusted the microphone. Before we proceed with the formal dedication, I'd like to invite the family whose journey inspired this center to share their story. He gestured toward the front row. Mr. Calloway, would you and your family join me? Will rose from his seat accompanied by Grace, now a vibrant 12-year-old, whose only visible remnant of her accident was an occasional slight hesitation in her gait when tired. Behind them came Tyler, 15 now and noticeably taller. His childhood solemnity matured into a thoughtful confidence. Lily, 11, followed, her natural exuberance tempered by the formality of the occasion, but still evident in her bright eyes. Rebecca joined them from the other side of the aisle. Elegant as always in a tailored suit, her professional demeanor softened by the pride evident in her expression as she watched the children ascend to the stage. Will stepped to the microphone, surveying the assembled crowd with a sense of wonderment at the path that had led them here. 5 years ago, he began, my daughter Grace was in a coma in this hospital, with doctors telling me to prepare for the possibility she might never wake up. Grace stood beside him, her hand slipping naturally into his, a gesture of support rather than dependence. The physical challenges of her recovery were largely behind her now, though certain cognitive processes still required extra focus, and occasional therapy sessions helped maintain her progress. I exhausted every medical option, consulted specialists from around the world, and explored experimental treatments, Will continued. But Grace's awakening began not with cutting-edge technology or revolutionary pharmaceuticals, but with something much simpler and more profound, the presence of a boy who knelt in a hospital corridor and prayed for a child he didn't know. Tyler ducked his head slightly at this reference, still uncomfortable with recognition, despite the pivotal role he had played. At 15, he had grown into a thoughtful young man whose early experiences had given him unusual empathy and wisdom. His interest in psychology had deepened over the years, fueled by his own experiences and his desire to understand how trauma and healing shaped human development. What followed was not just a medical recovery, but the formation of a new kind of family, Will continued. One that transcended conventional boundaries and definitions, to create something unique and enduring. He glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. Their co-parenting relationship had evolved over the years into a partnership that, while not without occasional tensions and disagreements, was grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to the children's well-being. The Elaine Mason Center, Will explained, is named for Tyler and Lily's mother, who faced her own medical crisis without the resources and support that might have changed her outcome. It stands as a tribute to her memory and a commitment that other families facing neurological trauma will find here not just medical expertise, but comprehensive support for the entire family system. The center had been funded through a combination of sources, a significant personal contribution from Will, matching funds from Callaway Investments' philanthropic foundation, grants secured through Rebecca's legal connections, and donations from medical professionals and families touched by similar experiences. Our family's journey taught us something crucial, Will continued. Medical recovery isn't just about the patient. It's about the constellation of relationships that surround them, the unexpected connections that form in crisis, and the power of integrating medical science with human compassion. He stepped back, allowing Grace to approach the microphone. Now in middle school, she had developed into a confident, articulate young person whose experiences had given her unusual perspective for her age. I don't remember much about being in the coma, she began, her voice clear and steady. But I remember the voices that reached me, even when I couldn't respond. My parents, of course, but also Tyler and Lily, who became my brother and sister, through a connection none of us expected. The legal formalization of Tyler and Lily's place in their unconventional family had been finalized 4 years earlier, a joint guardianship arrangement that Rebecca and Will shared, mirroring their co-parenting of Grace. The arrangement had required creativity, flexibility, and occasional legal innovation, but Rebecca's determination and Will's resources had overcome the bureaucratic challenges. When I finally woke up, Grace continued, I had to relearn so many things: how to walk, how to write my name, how to manage when words wouldn't come or memories slipped away. But I was never alone in that process. And that's what this center is about, making sure no one has to face recovery alone. She stepped back and Tyler moved forward, his natural reserve evident but his conviction stronger. My sister and I know what it's like to face medical crisis without resources, he said quietly. Our mother did everything she could for us, but she didn't have access to the kind of comprehensive support this center will provide. Medical care coordinated with financial counseling, psychological support, educational assistance for children whose schooling is disrupted, practical help with housing and transportation. His voice grew stronger as he continued. The most important thing we learned through Grace's recovery is that healing isn't just physical. It's emotional, spiritual, practical. It involves the entire family ecosystem. This center is designed to address all of those dimensions, not just for patients who can afford it, but for anyone facing neurological trauma. Lily stepped forward next, her natural expressiveness making her a compelling speaker, despite her young age. When we sing to patients here, we're doing what my mom taught us, that love travels through words when they're spoken with enough heart, and sometimes through music too. She smiled, her personality shining through. Every family that comes through these doors will find people who care not just about medical outcomes, but about what makes each person special and what helps them find their way back. Rebecca concluded the family's presentation, her legal precision complementing the children's more personal perspectives. The Mason Center incorporates best practices from rehabilitation centers worldwide, but with a uniquely holistic approach. Patients and families will find here not just medical treatment, but a community of support that understands the long journey of recovery and the reconstruction of life that follows neurological trauma. As the formal ribbon-cutting proceeded, Will found himself reflecting on the extraordinary path they had traveled. The crisis that had seemed like the end of his world had instead become the catalyst for its expansion, bringing Tyler and Lily into their lives, transforming his relationship with Rebecca from the acrimony of divorce to a functional partnership, and most remarkably, reshaping his understanding of what constituted success and meaning. Grace's recovery had been remarkable by any medical standard, a fact Dr. Abernathy still referenced in her research papers and conference presentations. But the healing had extended far beyond Grace herself, touching everyone in her orbit. The corporate empire Will had once prioritized above all else remained successful, though his priorities had shifted permanently, leading to a restructuring that allowed him more family time while maintaining the firm's growth. Charles Blackwood had eventually left to start his own investment firm, removing a source of tension and allowing the board to evolve in a more collaborative direction. Rebecca's legal career had also transformed, her practice now focusing increasingly on family advocacy and healthcare access. Her experience with Grace's recovery and the complex legal arrangements of their blended family had given her both expertise and passion for helping other families navigate similar challenges. Mrs. Parker remained a steady presence in their household, though her role had evolved from housekeeper to something more akin to extended family, attending school events, coordinating the increasingly complex schedules of 3 active children, and providing continuity across the 2 households that comprised their family structure. Sister Margaret continued her work at Hope Harbor, but with a new partnership, the shelter now served as a community outreach hub for the Mason Center, ensuring that families without resources received the same comprehensive support as those with means. She visited often, a beloved figure whom the children still regarded with special affection. As the ceremony concluded and the reception began, Will found himself standing with Rebecca, watching the 3 children move through the crowd together, Grace explaining features of the center to guests. Tyler engaged in serious conversation with Dr. Abernathy about the neuropsychology program, Lily charming donors with her natural warmth. "Did you ever imagine this 5 years ago?" Rebecca asked quietly. Will shook his head. "Not remotely. I was just desperate for Grace to open her eyes. I couldn't see beyond that moment." "And now look at what's grown from that desperation," Rebecca observed. "Not just Grace's recovery, but all of this, the center, our unusual family, the hundreds of families who will be helped here." Will nodded, watching as Tyler placed a supportive hand on Grace's shoulder when she momentarily lost her train of thought during a conversation, a brief reminder of the injury that had brought them together and the bond that had formed in its wake. "Family?" he said softly, echoing Grace's simple declaration from years earlier. "Family," Rebecca agreed, in all its complicated, imperfect, beautiful reality. As they moved to join the children, Will reflected on the truth they had discovered through crisis and recovery, that sometimes life's most profound gifts emerged not from careful planning, but from the courage to respond to unexpected circumstances with openness and compassion. That family could be defined not by conventional boundaries, but by the willingness to show up for each other, day after day, through challenges and celebrations alike. The Mason Center stood as testament to this truth, that healing happened not in isolation, but in connection, not through medical intervention alone, but through the integration of science and humanity, expertise and compassion, professional care and personal presence. In the atrium's corner, a small plaque displayed the center's guiding philosophy, drawn from Tyler's recollection of his mother's wisdom: "Love travels through words when they're spoken with enough heart." Below it, in smaller text, "In memory of Elaine Mason, and in honor of all who journey with those finding their way back to light." The sunlight streamed through the center's windows, illuminating the gathering of people united by this mission: medical professionals and family members, donors and patients, all part of the ecosystem of care that had grown from one boy's simple act of compassion in a hospital corridor 5 years earlier. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Grace, Tyler and Lily, but for countless families who would find in this place not just medical treatment, but comprehensive support for the long journey of recovery. The story that had begun in crisis had transformed into a legacy of healing that would extend far beyond their own experience, a reminder that even from life's most difficult moments, something beautiful and enduring could emerge.